Hello and welcome to the last episode of the economy department. Of course, we are going to continue with guides, but this is the last one about the economy itself. We are going to talk about some minor facts or deeper thoughts about things here. So basically, we left off with a mentioning of the culture. So autonomies are related to that. Your communication efficiency, which lowers autonomy, is related to that. You really want to keep an eye out for this. And there are some other things which have impact on everything we talked about, like industries, properties, infrastructures, and so on. Of course, you can read about a lot of stuff down here in the UI overlays, so about properties, about your industries, about your actually slots of industries or like the existing industries in there, but also about your populations and so on. Now, what I want to mention here, for example, for the communication efficiency and infrastructure part, which we talked about, is that there are so-called, no, that was the wrong one here. There are so-called ancient paths, which are basically from the, from the previous centuries and millennia, like Roman road networks. You can see here that there are certain ancient path systems. These are basically road systems which were used already in the Roman period or in the Greek Persian period here or in Egypt, which will help you build pathing. They not make it cheaper, but they make it faster in these provinces as long as they have pathing present. One of the main things to mention here are the connections between Constantinople into the east, so that you can go much faster through Anatolia to the Levant, basically here. That's an alternative to the naval part. But basically, if you want to go to Armenia here, this is a very efficient path leading into the later on into the Persian parts here. It's also basically the road networks which the Greeks used under Alexander the Great. So it's a very old pathing network which is partly connected to the Silk Road, as we can see here. So everything is somewhat coming down to Silk Road and everything in the past and in the present, which is still usable here. So basically you can, if you were to conquer all along the Silk Road, you can really have a nice pathing infrastructure here, which is very efficient. But you will never have 100% over here if you start, for example, in Constantinople. But the same here to, for example, to the west, which is the route they use to get to the Adriatic here. But also you have the Alpine crossings here, which are boosted this way if you have pathing present here. And you also have some supports here in Spain, which also represent Roman and Phoenician, or not Phoenician, but Carthaginian road networks, basically. Also here in the northern African bits, basically. Yeah, that's very important to know. So if you have pathing infrastructure present, these ones are going to be more efficient than, for example, normal provinces. You can also find the information about these ones in the terrain modifier, which is this one here. So you see at the top, ancient path through this province, and you have a navigable river flow through this province. So basically you can have both. You have river infrastructure, but you also have an ancient path. So it can lead into multiple directions from this province here, for example. Very important to know, very important to build up. And rivers I already talked about. I also want to mention here, because it's economy related, migration things. So provinces can migrate population to each other, depending on the freedom of the peasantry or what the nomads are doing in these provinces. So for example, in my realm here in Yemen, all my provinces can migrate to each other if they want to, if the freedom allows it. But also my vessels are part of my migration system. However, for example, the Mamluk, the Egyptian population, would not migrate between these two realms. So it's only your own realm and your vessels, unless there's an exemption, unless you play in the HRE. I have to get rid of this one here first. So the imperial setting here. basically the German parts of the Holy Roman Empire, which is basically everything northern of the Alpine part, is one migration system. So the Bohemian population could migrate to something like Münster or Cologne, while the Italian parts are also connected if they are in the HIE. So at the early game, these are all part of the HIE, so they can also migrate to each other. You also have a separate system for migration here in the east, as long as they are Mongol hordes, basically. So in these provinces here, Mongol nomads can migrate between each other. So basically you have these provinces here which still have significant nomad populations. They can migrate from left to right, basically, depending on where they like it more. And that's something very important to know. Generally, migration, which you need to grow your urban population, basically, can happen from everywhere where it is allowed, which depends on your peasant freedom. So if your freedom is 0, your peasants will basically not move because they are not allowed to. But this is very important if you really want to grow big cities. Now, also in regards to the economy, I can only once again stress that you have to manage your loyalties here. And there are certain interactions, for example, with the burghers here, where you can, I have it active currently, where you, for example, can boost the commerce here. You lose trade efficiency, but you get skill. So you get more production in your provinces for commerce, basically, which boosts up the burghers, makes them more powerful more quickly, makes them more profitable because they have to pay less to you. So that, for example, increases the commerce here in my Aden province. If you are playing a trade empire, that's very important. And also to mention, there's a skill system in your industries. I already mentioned that earlier, but basically every industry you have, so for example, if we take the crop industry here, it currently has a skill of 169.8. This is how effective it is. So the skill will not directly increase your output of that industry. Instead, the skill will decrease the labor it requires to produce the same output. For example, if one unit of crop industry produces 1 food and requires for this 1 rural labor, then if your skill goes up, it will require less labor to produce that 1 food. So you have separate sources of skill, like in your idea groups. For example, economic ideas provide you with urban and rural skills in general. You have trade ideas, which provide you with trade skills. You also have national idea groups, which provide you with skills. But you also have sources of skills here in the institutions. For example, commercialization provides urban skills, rural skills, trade skills, and mining skills. But there are also other things like the Colombian imports, which provide 15% rural skills. But they will also provide trade skills and herding skills and exotic skills here in provinces if they have embraced it. So it's very important to see the difference here though. So for example, the provincial effect here will only happen if your province has this one present, while the embraced effects are of course globally in every province as soon as you embrace it. And that's very important to see as a difference. For example, Colombian imports will provide you with a global bonus, but it will also provide you with a local bonus, depending if your province has it or not. That's very important to know, so you should keep an eye on these institutions. In general, your industry will get much more efficient over time, require less labor, and therefore, for example, encourage migration into your cities because peasants lose their job or are no longer, or you can grow into more property depending on what is present in your province, and therefore you can grow cities indirectly by having more food or by having more population available to migrate into these cities. And on another note, which is also very important to know if you are new to this, if you embrace Colombian imports, it allows the adoption of new crop types. So basically every province starts with something they produce food from. So let's take this province here for example. We start with millet, which is not really suitable for our every farmland here. As we can see here, we have a suitability of 49% only. And what you can see here now is that, for example, wheat is also available and barley, which is also less suitable. And then you see that there is an adaptation ongoing for rice, maize, and potatoes, which are coming from the New World, which was discovered, freshly discovered here. So basically, potatoes come from South America and North America, which we don't know, or Mesoamerica. This is where the maize is coming from. And therefore, we can adopt new crop types here. The adoption is going from 0 to 100%, depending. The speed depends on the suitability, for example. This province here will never be really nice because it's desert hills, basically, and the soil quality is relatively bad and the temperature extremely high. But for example, if we go to Sana here, Sana has an 82% soil quality, and as we can see here, the suitabilities for wheat, and barley and millet are much higher, and also the maize adaptation is going up nicely, and it might end up higher than the other ones. So it really is important to keep an eye out for. Now, if you know a little bit about history, then you know that, for example, maize was relatively quickly adopted here in Western Africa as a new crop type. And for example, for the Northern Europe part, potatoes were extremely important as a new crop type, which allowed for a much higher food output later on. So let's see if they already reached this one. Nope, they didn't, but let's maybe check out England here, or rather let's check out Ireland, which was a very important potato country. Didn't start here yet to be adopted. So that's still happening. Let's check out London. Yeah, they have started on everything, but it's very early in the campaign here still for new crop types. So it takes about a century to adapt a new crop. Maize is faster than most of the others. Potatoes is the slowest one. So we can check actually in Mali here if already something is progressing here. Yeah, maize is already 21% adoption here, so that goes up quickly. That will only take like another 5 to 10 years until it's done. Not sure if the suitability will end up higher than millet, for example, in this province, but depending on the climate and everything, this might be higher. So that's something very important to the food output of your provinces, which will go up significantly. Also, in the food calculations, just as a deeper thought to mention it, you have a 2 years, not a 2 year, but a 2-part cycle. So basically you have a winter and a summer harvest. So in Northern Europe, or in Europe in general, you only have one harvest season basically, because the second harvest season, the winter season, is too cold for most of the time. So your food is really limited by the summer temperatures. But for example, if you go into the more warm bits of the earth, like the equatorial bits basically, you have 2 harvest seasons, and therefore the food outputs are, for example, extremely high in comparison. So let's take Nakor here in Bunjoro at the Lake Victoria. We can see here that it only has millet available, but the output is 2.3 of food. Now let's compare that to the output, for example, of here in Jaffa, for example. Here the millet output, oh, it's 2.8 actually, so it's even better here. Sounds like that the soil quality is much better. Yeah, soil quality is only 6.7 here, 67%. So maybe that wasn't a good example, but basically, depending on the seasons, you have better food outputs as well. If it's too warm, you also have a problem. So like the desert provinces here. So if the best provinces are, of course, if you have a decent temperature all year round, then you can have a really high food output overall. Let's check Madagascar for fun. Millet has 2.4, rice has 2.6. So in total it has 2.6 because it's basically growing only rice here, as it is the most efficient for, even with only a suitability of 66%, which is low. But yeah, so that's something to look out for. and of course increase your skills, which decrease your labor, so you can grow into more property, but you can also make more cities and therefore make your overall wealth higher. And also the other institutions will help you with that as well. Now, I think that's the main parts about economy in general. I can only stress out how important autonomy is, because low autonomy also reduces corruption in these provinces. So for example, we still have a 52% corruption here, but it's going down significantly because we were reforming recently. So you really want to keep an eye out on that. You want to reduce your autonomies to just be more efficient and make your state control over the economy much more efficient as well. Yeah, and with that, I'm going to leave the chapter of economics, and the next chapter is going to be about politics and diplomacy. So some changes we did towards subjects, relations, and how it's all interconnected with the systems I already explained. Therefore, see you in the next chapter.